My name is Jody Lewis, and I'm 34 years old. On my second day home from work with a herniated disc, the kind that makes lifting a gallon of milk feel like lifting a car, my mother and my sister left 3 children on my front porch and drove off. Mom's text read, "We have an emergency out of town, watch them." I wrote, "I can't, I'm injured." She answered, "Save the excuses, family helps." What they didn't know was that I'd already reached for my phone to call the one person they'd spent 2 months hiding those kids from. 3 days later, when they finally came home, the whole town already knew exactly where they'd really been. This is the story of the weekend I stopped being my family's spare set of hands. To understand that weekend, you have to understand the house I was sitting in. The house on Cypress Lane was my grandmother's before it was mine. Opal Lewis raised 3 kids in it and buried a husband from it, and when she got sick, I was the one who moved in to care for her. Not because anyone asked, because that's what I do. I'm a certified nursing assistant. I've spent 11 years lifting other people's parents out of beds, turning them so they don't get sores, holding a hand at 2 in the morning when nobody in their family bothered to come. I did the same for Opal, except with her, it wasn't work. With her, it was love. She was the only person in my life who ever looked at me and asked, "Are you okay, honey?" and actually waited for the answer. When she passed 2 years ago, she left me the house. My mother called it favoritism. I called it the only inheritance I ever needed, which was somebody, once, choosing me. I hadn't gotten around to her headstone yet. Keep that in mind, because it matters. Out at Winslow Memorial, my grandmother's grave still had a little tin marker pushed into the grass, the temporary kind the funeral home gives you. Her name printed on a card behind cloudy plastic. I drove past it once a week and told myself I'd fix it soon. There was one room in that house I never used. My mother had been using it as her filing cabinet for years, dropping off boxes she didn't want to deal with, adding to the pile whenever it suited her. She'd brought over another one just a few months back. She used my spare room the same way she used me, and I hadn't noticed the pattern yet. Remember those boxes? I grew up as what my family called the strong one. My little sister Shelby was the sensitive one. That arrangement was decided before I was old enough to argue. Shelby is 30 now, 4 years younger than me, and for as long as I can remember, the rule was the same. She felt things. I handled things. There's a photograph somewhere of me at 8 years old, holding her the day she came home from the hospital. I'm barely bigger than she is. My mother likes that picture. She used to say it showed what a good big sister I was. Looking back, I think it showed the day I got my job. I could sit here and tell you I always saw it clearly. I didn't. For 34 years, I mistook being useful for being loved, and nobody corrects a mistake that's working out that well for them. The back went out on a Tuesday. At Cedar Ridge Care Center, where I work, we had a resident named Mr. Ledbetter, 89 and stubborn as a fence post. He started to go down in the hallway, all his weight tipping sideways, and I did what you're trained never to do alone. I caught him. You don't let an 89-year-old hit tile if you can help it. He didn't fall. I did. In a different way. Something in my lower back tore loose, bright and electric, and I went home that night walking like a woman 30 years older. The doctor's name was Callahan. He put the scan up on the screen and pointed at 2 vertebrae down near the base of my spine, herniated disc, L4 and L5. No lifting over 10 pounds, he said. No bending, no twisting. You rest that back, or you'll be looking at surgery by spring. 10 pounds. A gallon of milk is 8. I wrote it down like it was a number I'd need. He signed me off work. I taped the note to my refrigerator and spent the next 2 days on the couch with a bag of frozen peas pressed to my spine, learning how to stand up without crying. On the morning of the 3rd day, my phone lit up on the cushion beside me. One word on the screen. Mom. We have an emergency out of town. I texted back the only thing that was true. I can't. I'm injured. 3 dots appeared. Then nothing. I sat there holding the phone, And outside, before she'd even answered me, I heard a car turn into my gravel driveway. I got up the way Dr. Callahan told me not to, bracing on the arm of the couch. And by the time I made it to the front window, my mother's SUV was already backing out. 3 small figures stood on my porch. Harper, my oldest niece, 8 years old, holding a rolling suitcase almost as tall as she was. Cooper, 6, with his backpack on both shoulders. And Piper, the baby, 3 years old, sitting down on the top step because nobody had told her where to go. The passenger window came down halfway. My sister Shelby leaned toward it. "They're good kids. They won't be any trouble," she called, and the window was already going back up. "Mom'll explain. Love you." Then the SUV was gone. A child's booster seat sat tipped over on my front lawn where they'd set it down. That was the goodbye. By the time I got the door open, the taillights were at the end of the lane. That's when my mother's next text came through. "Save the excuses. Family helps." I looked at it for a long time. I typed back that I couldn't lift anything, that the doctor had said 10 pounds, that Piper alone weighed 3 times that. The dots came up while she read it. Then they disappeared. I called her. Straight to voicemail. 1 ring. The fast way that only happens when a person presses the button to send you away. So there I was. A herniated disc, a signed note on the fridge, and 3 children I could not physically care for standing in my living room, looking up at me. Harper set her suitcase down and looked around like she was checking into a hotel. "Are we really staying 3 whole days?" she asked. 3 days. Nobody had said 3 days. My mother's text had said, "Watch them," the way you'd say, "Watch my drink" while I run to the restroom. I knelt down, slow, 1 knee at a time, to get level with them. "Did Grandma say 3 days, sweetheart?" Harper nodded. Cooper was already opening my kitchen cabinets, looking for snacks. And Piper walked over and lifted both her arms up to me. The universal sign. "Pick me up." I couldn't. "I want you to sit with that, because I've thought about it more than anything else that week." A baby raised her arms to me, and I had to look down at her and say, "I can't pick you up right now, baby. I'm so sorry." She didn't understand. Why would she? She just kept her arms up, waiting, until they slowly came down, and something in her little face closed. I lowered myself the rest of the way to the floor so at least I could be at her level, and I put my hand on her back. And that was all I had to give her. Cooper found a sleeve of crackers and turned around with his mouth full. "Is Grandma at the beach yet?" he asked. The beach. I remember exactly how that word sat in the air, because there was no beach in my mother's text. There was an emergency out of town. That first night taught me exactly how impossible the next 3 would be. Dinner was cereal, because I couldn't stand at the stove long enough to make anything else. When Piper needed to wash her hands, I couldn't lift her to the sink, so I dragged a plastic step stool over with my foot and held her steady by the shoulder while she climbed. When Cooper knocked over a full cup of juice, I couldn't bend to clean it. I lowered myself down the wall, 1 vertebra at a time, and wiped it with a dish towel while the pain wrapped around my hip and squeezed. A 3-year-old weighs about 30 pounds. My limit was 10. That math doesn't leave any room for an emergency. I got them into pajamas by narrating instead of doing. Harper helped Piper. Cooper mostly helped himself. And when I unpacked Piper's little bag to find her toothbrush, I found something else folded on top. A swimsuit. A small pink swimsuit with a ruffle. And underneath it, a travel bottle of children's sunscreen. I held the sunscreen in my hand and thought, you don't pack sunscreen for an emergency. At the table, the kids told me the rest without knowing they were telling me anything. "Grandma said we're going swimming," Cooper announced, "but not us. Just Grandma and Mommy." "We get to stay at your house," Harper explained, in the patient voice of an 8-year-old who has been briefed. "And we're not going to Daddy's this time." That stopped me. "Why not Daddy's?" I asked, careful, keeping my voice easy. Harper looked at me like she was deciding whether it was allowed. Then she leaned in a little. "Mommy said not to tell Daddy where we're going." I nodded like that was a normal thing to say. Inside, something cold turned over. Because here is what I knew. My sister and the kid's father, Cody, had split up the year before. It wasn't friendly, but it had settled into something. Cody had the kids some weekends. And then, about 2 months ago, that had quietly stopped. Every time Cody was supposed to see them, Shelby had a reason. The kids were sick. The kids had a party. The kids were busy. I'd heard her say it and hadn't thought hard about it, because thinking hard about my family was a habit I'd trained myself out of. Now there was a swimsuit on my table and an 8-year-old telling me not to tell her father where she was. I got all 3 of them to sleep eventually. Harper and Cooper in the spare bed, after we moved a few of my mother's boxes to make room. Piper on the couch under a quilt, because she wanted to be near a grown-up, and I couldn't carry her to a bed anyway. Then I sat in the dark in my grandmother's living room, with my back screaming and 3 children breathing softly around me, and I let myself think the thought all the way through. I ran back over my whole life with this family. Every holiday I hosted while Shelby showed up empty-handed. Every time my mother needed a ride to a doctor and called me instead of her favorite daughter, because I was the reliable one. Every dollar I'd chipped in for things that were supposed to be shared, and I could not find anywhere in 34 years a single time that any of them had asked whether I was the one who needed help. Not once, not when Opal died and I planned the whole funeral alone. Not that Tuesday, when I tore my back catching a stranger so he wouldn't hit the floor. They didn't call to check on my back. They called to drop off their kids. I picked up my phone. I scrolled to a name I'd been told, more than once, that we don't call. A name my sister spat like a curse. Cody. My thumb hovered over it. If your family only reaches for you when they need something, and never once when you're the one who's hurting, then you already know exactly how that night felt. Stay with me. It changes. I want to be clear about why I did what I did, because my mother would later try to make it sound like a betrayal. I could not safely care for those children. That's a fact, not an opinion. I could not lift the 3-year-old. If she'd fallen in the tub, if she'd run into the street, if any of the 100 things that happen with small kids had happened, I could not have gotten to her the way a healthy person could. And the man who could was their father, who had every right to his own children and had been kept from them for 2 months. There was nothing to debate. I pressed the name. The kitchen clock said 11:04. My porch light was the only one on the block. He answered on the first ring, which told me he'd been awake, and his voice came through careful and low. Jody? We hadn't spoken in a long time. I told him where his kids were. I told him they were on my couch, that I couldn't lift them, and that there was apparently an emergency out of town. There was a silence on his end. Then I heard him sit down, a chair scraping across the floor. There's no emergency, Jody, he said. His voice had something raw in it. There's no emergency. She just didn't want me to have them. It came out of him then, quiet and tired. The way things come out of a person who's been holding them too long. He'd been trying to see his kids for 2 months. Every arranged weekend Shelby had canceled. He had the messages, he said. He'd started saving them, because he'd begun to feel like he might need to prove someday that he had tried. The kids are sick. The kids have plans. Now's not a good time. Over and over in her words, with dates attached. He wasn't angry when he told me. That was the part that got me. He just sounded like a man who'd run out of ways to be surprised. Then he asked me the question I couldn't answer. Where did they say they were going? The emergency. And I opened my mouth, and I realized I had no idea. My mother had said out of town. My sister had said nothing at all. A 6-year-old had said the beach, and an 8-year-old had told me not to tell this exact man where they'd gone. I had 3 children in my house, and I did not know what state their mother was in. I don't know, I said. I honestly don't know. Okay, Cody said. I'll come get them in the morning, if that's all right. It was more than all right. It was the first time in that entire endless night that someone had asked me if something was all right with me. He came at 9 the next morning. I've replayed the moment the kids saw him more times than I can count. Cooper heard the truck door and looked out the window and just screamed, "Daddy!" And all three of them went for the front door at once. Harper got there first and had it open before I could tell her to slow down. Cody came up the walk, and Piper, my little Piper, ran at him with both arms straight up in the air. The exact same gesture she'd made to me the night before. The one I couldn't answer. He caught her. He swung her up onto his hip like she weighed nothing, like it was the easiest thing in the world, and she wrapped herself around his neck. For once, somebody was there to catch her. I stood in the doorway with one hand pressed against the frame and the other against my lower back, and I watched a man do the simple physical thing I hadn't been able to do, and I felt two things at the same time. Relief that they were safe, and a grief I didn't have a name for yet. He got them loaded into his truck, buckling car seats he clearly knew by heart, and as he leaned in to click Piper's harness, Harper said, "From the back seat? Matter of fact? Grandma said we'd be at the beach house by now." Cody went still for just a second. Then he finished the buckle and he looked back at me over the roof of the truck. Neither of us said anything. We didn't have to. The beach house. After his truck pulled away, I did something I should have done the night before. I texted my mother a plain question. "The kids are with Cody. Where are you?" The little word appeared under it almost immediately. Read 9:12 a.m., then nothing. No reply came. Not that morning, not that afternoon, not for 3 days. She'd read it standing wherever she was standing, and she'd decided I didn't require an answer. My mother, who expected me to drop everything for an emergency I couldn't name, could not spare me a single sentence about where that emergency was. "Beach house," Harper had said, but my mother's own words, in writing, said emergency out of town. Both things could not be true. I sat down at my kitchen table with my phone and I did the thing I'd spent my whole life avoiding. I went looking. I scrolled back through my messages with Shelby. Weeks of them, months of them, and about 4 months back I found a thread I'd honestly half forgotten. From the spring. A group text, the three of us, me and Shelby and Mom. My sister had started it. "June beach trip," it said. "You, me, Mom. Cody has the kids that weekend anyway." I read that line 4 times. You, me, Mom. I'd been in it. Back in the spring, when it was a fun idea, I was one of the 3 names. There was a whole cheerful back and forth after it. Someone had linked a place in Destin. Someone had said we should get seafood. I remembered, dimly, being happy about it. The way you're happy about something far enough away that nothing has ruined it yet. And then, scrolling down, I watched the thread change. A few weeks after it started, my sister had written, "Actually, we might cancel. Money's tight." And I'd written back something easy and forgiving. "No worries, another time." And the thread had gone quiet. I'd assumed it was over. I'd filed it under trips that don't happen and never thought about it again. But it hadn't been canceled. I was sitting in a house with the leftover crackers of a 3-day childcare shift to prove it. The trip had happened. My mother and my sister were, at that exact moment, somewhere on the Gulf Coast, and I was here. They didn't cancel the trip. They canceled me. I put the phone face down on the table because I needed to not look at it. And of course, that was the moment it buzzed against the wood, some notification from the town group lighting up the gap. Everything ends up online in a place like Winslow. I turned it back over, saw it wasn't anything, and set it aside. Because there was something I needed to find first, and I had a feeling it would be in my email, where the boring truth of a thing usually hides. Months earlier, when the beach trip was still a happy plan, Shelby had forwarded me something. A confirmation, she'd said, so we could all save the dates. I'd glanced at it back then and archived it and moved on with my life. I searched my inbox now. Emerald Sands Resort, Destin, Florida. And there it was, from the spring, sitting in my archive the whole time. I opened it and read it slowly. A 3-night reservation, check-in and check-out dates that matched exactly the 3 days I just spent giving cereal to somebody else's children, and under the details, plain as anything, the guest count. Party of 3 guests. My name was one of them. Shelby had forwarded me the booking because, back in the spring, I was going. I sat with that. If the reservation had been made for 3 and my mother and sister had driven off to use it, then at some point between the spring and last week, that party of 3 had become a party of 2. Somebody had been taken off the trip, and I already knew, from the kids, who was still on it. Just Grandma and Mommy in the big room, Harper had told me, describing the beach house she'd never gotten to see. 2. Grandma and Mommy, not 3. Not me. I didn't need to call the resort. I didn't need anyone to confirm anything. The math did it for me. The trip was booked for 3. 2 people went, and the third person, the one who'd been quietly subtracted, was sitting at her grandmother's kitchen table with a torn-up back, babysitting the reason there was room in the car. I turned the doctor's note over on the fridge, took a pen, and wrote it out so I could look at it. 3, an arrow, 2. Because I needed to see the shape of what they'd done. And here's where it stopped being an accident in my mind. There's a difference, and I want to be careful about it. Getting left out of a trip because money got tight, that hurts. But it happens. That's what I'd believed for months. That's the story I'd been handed and had politely accepted. No worries. Another time. But that's not what this was. They hadn't dropped the trip. They'd dropped me from it, told me it was canceled. And then, when I got hurt, they'd looked at the injured woman who couldn't say no and found a use for her. They needed somebody to keep the kids so the 2 of them could go. And they knew. They absolutely knew that I was the one person in that family who'd open the door and take the children in, even from a couch, even with a note on the fridge that said, I couldn't. I wasn't left out of a vacation. I was reassigned to a job. I looked up from the note, and my eyes went, the way they had 100 times, to the door of the spare room, to my mother's boxes, because something small was surfacing. Something about money we'd all put in, a few months back, for a completely different reason. Before I opened those boxes, I drove out to see my grandmother. I don't know exactly why. My back didn't want me driving, but I needed to be somewhere that wasn't that kitchen. Winslow Memorial is a small cemetery on the edge of town, oak trees and old stones, and Opal is in the newer section near the fence. Her grave still had the tin marker. 2 years she'd been gone, and her name was still behind cloudy plastic. The card faded now, the metal edge curling up out of the grass that had started to grow over it. Here's the thing. About 4 months back, my mother had organized a collection. A family fund, she'd called it, to finally buy Grandma a proper granite headstone. We'd all put in. I'd sent $1,200, which for a nursing assistant is not a small number. Shelby had put in something. My mother was going to handle the order. I stood there looking at the tin card, and I thought, where is her stone? I drove home faster than my back liked. I went straight to the spare room, to the most recent box, the one my mother had brought over when we were all collecting for the headstone. If there was paperwork about it, an order form, a receipt from a monument company, it might be in there. My mother kept everything and organized none of it, and she'd offloaded it onto me like she offloaded everything. I knelt down, slow, and started going through it. Old bank statements, warranty cards for appliances she didn't own anymore, a shoebox of receipts held together with a rubber band. I went through the shoebox one slip at a time. Grocery receipts, a vet bill, and then a piece of paper that didn't belong with the others. Emerald Sands Resort, a deposit confirmation, a payment toward the reservation. I looked at the amount. Then I looked at the date. The deposit had been paid the same week I sent my mother the money for my grandmother's headstone. I sat down on the floor of that spare room with 2 pieces of paper in my hands, and I made myself do the arithmetic out loud, quietly, alone, because I needed to hear it to believe it. I'd given $1,200 for Opal's stone. There was no stone. There was a tin card curling up out of the grass, and there was a resort deposit, in roughly that amount, paid the same week, sitting in a shoebox in my own house. The money meant for my grandmother's headstone had helped pay for their beach house. The one person who'd ever chosen me, the only unconditional love I'd ever been handed. They'd used her grave, her unbought stone, to fund the trip they'd erased me from, and then made me pay for a second time with 3 days of my ruined back. I didn't cry, sitting there. It had gone past crying into something quieter and colder. I laid the 2 slips side by side on the kitchen table, the reservation and the deposit, and I just looked at them. And my phone buzzed. It was Gwen, my coworker from Cedar Ridge, the closest thing I had to a real friend. Her text sat there glowing. "Hey, this is random, but isn't that your mom and Shelby and Loretta's Destin pics?" I opened it and tapped the photos she'd sent along with it. Loretta Pike is a woman from our church. Big personality, bigger phone camera, the kind who posts everything. And that week, Loretta had been at Emerald Sands Resort in Destin, Florida. The same resort. The same days. She'd posted a whole album, public for anyone to see, and there in the background of one of her poolside pictures were my mother and my sister. Sandra in a sun hat with a drink in her hand. Shelby stretched out on a float, laughing at something. Blue water, hard sunlight, a swim-up bar. The caption under it read, "Living our best life at Emerald Sands, girls' trip." I checked the date on the post. It had gone up the morning after my mother texted me the word emergency. While I was on my floor with 3 children I couldn't lift, my mother was in a sun hat by a pool, close enough to a stranger's camera to end up in the background of the whole town's feed. But the photos weren't the worst of it. The worst of it, I found, because Gwen sent me one more thing. "Also," she wrote, "no offense, but why is your mom on the prayer chain?" Our church has a prayer chain. It's a text list and a phone tree, and it's meant for real things. Someone's cancer, a car accident, a job lost. When your name goes on the prayer chain, 40 people start praying for you and bringing you casseroles. My mother had put our family on it. The message had gone out from Darlene Foss, who runs the chain, and it said our family was going through an urgent emergency out of town and asked everyone to please keep the Lewis family in their prayers. It had been sent the same morning they left for the beach. They'd asked an entire congregation to pray over a lie. They'd booked that weekend back in the spring, paid for it with my grandmother's headstone money, and then dressed it up as a tragedy so the church would fuss over them while they drank by a pool. My phone rang in my hand. Darlene. I let it go once, then answered. "Jody, honey, is your family okay?" Her voice was warm and worried. "We've all been praying. We're bringing food by the church Sunday for when your mama gets back. You come too, all right?" Sunday. My mother and sister were driving home Sunday, straight into a fellowship hall full of people who'd spent the week praying for their emergency and cooking for their safe return. Casseroles lined up on the long table, cards signed. The whole church ready to wrap its arms around 2 women who'd been sipping frozen drinks in Destin. And here's what I want you to understand about my decision, because it wasn't revenge. I sat with everything spread out in front of me. The reservation for 3. The doctor's note that said £10. The deposit paid with Opal's stone money. The photos. The prayer chain. I was not going to that church to fight anybody. I wasn't going to scream. I was going because I was done. Done being the family's spare set of hands, and done, most of all, letting the whole town pray for a lie while I sat home and kept my mouth shut to protect the people who'd used me. I wasn't going there to fight. I was going there to stop lying for them. I took the pages off my kitchen table and folded them, careful, and put them in my purse. 4 of them. And on Sunday morning I got dressed, slow, one sleeve at a time, and I drove to church. Before you see what happened when they walked back into that church, comment, "Family helps," if your family has ever made you the villain just for telling the truth. The fellowship hall at our church is a big linoleum room in the back, folding tables and metal chairs, a coffee urn in the corner. By the time I got there Sunday, it was full. 40 people, easy. Darlene had outdone herself. The long table down the middle was covered in food: casserole dishes, a ham, sweet tea, a sheet cake. A card stood propped up in the middle, big enough for everyone to sign, and I could read it from the door. "We're praying for you, Lewis family." Cody was there too, in the back, with Harper and Cooper and Piper scrubbed clean in their Sunday clothes. He gave me a small nod. He'd figured, same as me, that Sunday was the day. Then the door opened, and my mother and my sister walked in. They were tan. That was the first thing everybody saw. 3 days of Gulf sun on their faces and shoulders, relaxed and rested. My mother carrying a fruit tray she'd picked up on the drive home, like a woman arriving at a potluck. They walked into that room expecting sympathy, and the room went quiet. Not all at once. It rolled back from the door as people looked up, and looked at each other, and went still. Because a lot of those 40 people followed Loretta Pike online. A lot of them had already seen the sun hat and the float and the girls' trip. The casseroles were already cooling on the table, and the story behind them had already come apart, and my mother walked into the middle of it holding cut pineapple. She felt it. I watched her feel it. The smile on her face flickered, and then she did what she always does when she feels the ground move. She went on offense, and she came at me. "Well," she said, loud enough for the room, her eyes locking onto me across the tables. "There she is." Every head turned. "You want to explain yourself, Jody?" She set the fruit tray down hard. "You called Cody behind our backs. You handed my grandchildren over to that man, and you got the whole town whispering. Do you know what you've done to this family?" Shelby was right behind her, and on cue, my sister's eyes filled up. She pressed a knuckle under one eye and let out a small wounded sound, and a couple of the older women near her made sympathetic noises. "We had an emergency," my mother went on, "and instead of helping, my own daughter went and stabbed us in the back and aired our business to strangers. I think you owe this family an apology." Right here. There it was. In front of 40 people and a table of casseroles, she was demanding that I stand up and say I was sorry. That I be the villain. Out loud, so the story could go back to the way she'd written it. The room waited. They looked at me, expecting me to fold, because folding is what I'd done my whole life. I didn't raise my voice. I want you to know that. Not once. That entire day. I just said quietly, "What emergency, Mom?" She blinked. "What? You keep saying emergency. I'd like you to tell everyone what it was." And this is the part I couldn't have planned if I'd tried. Because my sister, who did not know that Loretta's photos were already all over town, who thought this was still a fight she could win by crying, jumped in to defend herself. "Oh, don't act like it was some crime," Shelby snapped, wiping her face, her voice going hard. "We booked that weekend months ago. We paid for it. We weren't about to waste it sitting around babysitting." The word landed in that room like a dropped plate. Babysitting. Somebody actually gasped. Over by the window, I saw Loretta Pike quietly turn her phone face down on the table, like she suddenly didn't want anyone to think she'd started this. My mother's face went gray. She turned to my sister with a look I'd never seen her give her favorite child. But it was already out. Everyone in that hall had just heard the emergency described, by one of the 2 women it happened to, as a trip they didn't want to waste. Pastor Hollis, who is a gentle man and had been standing very still by the coffee urn, cleared his throat. "Sandra," he said carefully, "Loretta shared some pictures this week, from Destin." He almost said it like he was giving her a way out. Was there some mistake? There was no mistake, and everyone knew it now. But I wasn't going to let it rest on a rumor and a photo. I'd brought more than that. I opened my purse. I didn't make a speech. I've sat through enough of my mother's speeches to last a lifetime, and I wasn't going to become her to beat her. I just took out the pages, one at a time, and set them down on the church table between the ham and the sweet tea, where people could see. This is the reservation, I said, laying down the first one. Emerald Sands. In Destin. Booked in the spring. For 3 nights this week. The exact days I was watching the kids. I laid down the second page. It's booked for 3 guests. My name is on it. I was supposed to go. I looked at my mother. Then in the spring, I was told the trip was canceled. Money was tight. That's what you told me. Nobody said anything, so I set down the third page. This is the message Darlene sent out on the prayer chain, asking all of you to pray for our family's emergency. I touched the corner of it. Look at the time on it. It went out the same morning these two left for the beach. Darlene put her hand over her mouth. Then I took out the last page. And this one, I set down softer than the others, because it was the one that still hurt me to hold. And this, I said, is a deposit for that resort. Paid the same week I sent Mom $1,200 for Grandma Opal's headstone. I looked at my mother, and for the first time in my whole life, I watched her have nothing to say. There's still no headstone, I told her. My voice stayed level. Opal's still got a tin card in the ground out at the cemetery. You spent her stone on a beach house. I paused. You didn't have an emergency, Mom. You had a reservation. The room did not erupt. It wasn't that kind of moment. It went the other way. It got very quiet. And in that quiet, 40 people slowly understood exactly what they'd been asked to pray for and cook for. A few of them set down their paper plates. Somebody near the back said softly, "Lord have mercy." My mother stood there in her sunburn, and Shelby had stopped crying, because tears weren't going to fix this, and even she could see it. My mother reached for the last thing she had. "Jody," she said, and her voice had changed, gone softer, gone wounded. "How could you do this to your mother? In church?" And I realized she still didn't understand. She thought the crime in the room was that I'd shown the papers. Not the beach, not the prayer chain, not my grandmother's grave. Me. Telling the truth. I picked my pages back up off the table, unhurried, and put them in my purse. "I didn't do this to you," I said. "You did this. I just stopped covering for it." I looked around that hall one time, at Darlene, who looked sick, at Pastor Hollis, at the neighbors and the church ladies, at Cody in the back with his 3 kids, and at Piper, my Piper, who gave me a little wave because she didn't understand any of it and just knew her aunt was there. "I'm done being this family's spare set of hands," I said. I wasn't only talking to my mother. "Don't leave anything else on my porch." Then I turned and walked out. Gus Hartley, my neighbor, had come to church that morning, and he was standing by the door. He's not a talker. He just pushed the heavy door open for me and held it, and the Sunday light came pouring in across all that untouched food. Behind me, I heard my mother start to follow, still saying my name. And I heard something else. I heard that a lot of the room did not go with her. The door closed behind me. And for the first time in 34 years, I walked out of a room for myself and let them sort out the mess they'd made without me. The truth did not turn the whole town against my mother overnight, and I want to be honest about that, because that's not how it works in a real place where people have known each other for 40 years. My mother and my sister got in the car and started telling their own version before they'd even left the parking lot. By Monday, it was going around. Jody was bitter. Jody was jealous of Shelby. Always had been. Jody had ripped 3 babies away from their mother and handed them to a man who didn't deserve them. Some people believed it. My Aunt Cheryl called me that week, and she didn't ask a single question about the headstone or the prayer chain. She just said, a real daughter wouldn't have embarrassed her mother in church. I got left off the Thanksgiving list that year. Nobody said it to my face. I just never got the text about what to bring, and I understood. So no, the truth didn't hand me a victory with a bow on it. Setting a boundary cost me people. It's supposed to. If it doesn't cost you anything, it isn't a boundary. It's just a comment. But some things did change, and they were the things that mattered. Cody has his kids now, regularly. That turned out to be the quiet miracle underneath all of it. Once the whole town had seen the truth, My sister couldn't keep inventing reasons the kids were too sick or too busy to see their father because everyone already knew what that was worth. Cody didn't have to fight her. He just had to keep showing up, in the open, and she couldn't afford to be caught blocking him again. A couple of weeks after the church, he texted me. Not about any of the drama, just, "Kids keep asking when they can see Aunt Jody." He sent a picture with it. The three of them piled on his couch, Harper mid-laugh, Cooper making a face, Piper asleep against her sister's arm. Safe. Home with their dad. A few days later, an envelope showed up in my mailbox with my name spelled wrong on the front in purple marker. Inside was a drawing, 3 stick figures and a taller one, all holding hands under a yellow sun, and at the top, in Harper's careful writing, Aunt Jody. Piper had scribbled her part. A 3-year-old gave me more, freely, than my mother had given me in 34 years. My mother tried one more time. It came about a month later, the way it always did, wrapped in something that sounded like need. A text. Late one evening. Her back was hurting, she said. She couldn't get to the store. She didn't know who else to ask. A year earlier, I'd have been in the car before I finished reading it. That was the whole machine, right there. She hurts. I come running, and running gets called love. I read it twice, and then I texted back the truth. Kindly, because I'm not interested in becoming cruel just because I finally stopped being useful. I hope you feel better, Mom. I'm not coming to fix it. Then I put my phone face down on my kitchen table, the same table where I'd laid out those 4 pages, and I made myself a cup of coffee, and my hands were steady. For the first time in my life, I hung up on my mother and didn't feel guilty. I just felt quiet. I bought my grandmother's headstone myself. I didn't ask anyone to chip in. I didn't start a fund. I called a monument company 2 towns over, and I picked out gray granite, and I paid for it out of my own account. The same amount I'd handed my mother a season before for the exact same thing. It took a few weeks to be cut and set. The day they installed it, I drove out to Winslow Memorial and sat in the grass beside it. They'd pulled the little tin card out of the ground, and where it had been, there was solid stone now, her name carved deep enough that the weather will never fade it. Opal Lewis. Cut to last. You always asked if I was okay, I told her, out loud, the way you talk to people who are past hearing but never past mattering. I'm getting there. I really think I'm getting there. My life got smaller after that, and better. Gus showed up one Saturday with a toolbox and fixed the porch step that had been sagging since spring. I hadn't asked him to. When I tried to pay him, he waved me off like I'd insulted him. "Just fixing your step, Jody," he said. "No, I don't need anything for it." And that was the whole conversation. A man did something kind and wanted nothing back, and it startled me how strange that still felt. Gwen from work started coming by. She'd bring soup and complain about our supervisor and stay too late, and it was wonderful. Cody brings the kids around when it works out, on my good days, when my back can handle 3 of them climbing on the couch. Nobody who comes to my house now comes to collect something. They just come. There was one Saturday that fall I keep going back to. The weather had finally broken, that first real cool morning after a long Georgia summer, and my back was having one of its good days, loose enough that I could lower myself onto the floor and get up again without planning it like a mission. Cody dropped the 3 of them off after lunch. He had something to do in town and asked if a couple of hours was too much, and I told him to take his time. For a little while, my grandmother's house was loud again, the good kind of loud. Cooper had figured out that the porch step Gus fixed didn't creak anymore, and he'd turned that into a full afternoon's work, jumping off it, landing in the leaves, climbing back up, doing it again, maybe 400 times. Piper wanted to color, so I got down the coffee can of crayons I'd started keeping in the cabinet just for them, and we spread paper all across the kitchen table. And I sat there, and I watched Harper. Working. That's the only word for what she was doing. She wasn't coloring the way Piper was, dragging a crayon across the page for the pure joy of the color coming out. She was 8, and somewhere along the way, she'd made herself the manager of the room. She capped Piper's markers before they could dry out. She slid Cooper's juice cup back from the edge of the table without even looking at it. When Piper stretched for a crayon just out of reach, Harper had it in her hand and passed it over before I could so much as lean forward. "I've got her," Harper said, when she saw me start to get up. "I've got her." I sat back down, and everything in my chest went very still, because I knew that sentence. I'd said that sentence. I'd been saying it my entire life. I've got her. I've got it. Don't get up. Don't worry about me. I've got it. I looked at this little girl, quick and careful and already worn thin around the edges in a way no 8-year-old should be, and it was like looking straight into an old photograph. There's a picture of me at exactly her age, holding Shelby the day they brought her home from the hospital. My mother framed it. For 30 years, I thought it showed what a good big sister I was. Sitting at that table, watching Harper cap her little sister's markers, I finally understood what that picture actually showed. It showed the afternoon somebody handed me a job and told me it was who I was. Harper was standing in the same spot I'd stood in my whole life. And the worst part was that nobody had put her there on purpose. That's not how it happens. The capable child gets praised for being capable, and the praise feels like love, so she reaches for more of it, and she keeps reaching, and one day she's a grown woman on her living room floor with a torn-up back, still saying, "I've got it" to people who never once stopped to ask whether she did. Then Piper knocked her whole cup of water across the table. Before it had even finished spreading toward the crayons, Harper was up, already grabbing the paper towels, already saying, "It's okay, I'll get it, it's okay." Fast and low, like the spill was somehow her fault, like a mess in the room was a thing she'd failed to prevent. I put my hand on her arm. "Hey, sit down, sweetheart, I've got this one." She looked at me like I'd spoken another language. "But your back." "My back's fine today. And even if it wasn't, this still isn't yours to fix." I mopped up the water myself, slow, and I made sure she watched me do every bit of it. A cup of water tipping over is nobody's fault, Harper. It's just a Saturday. That's all it is. She sat back down, but she kept watching me, the way you watch a person when the rules have changed and you're not sure yet whether to believe the new ones. We colored a while longer, and then Harper, in the small, careful voice of a child testing whether a thing is safe to say out loud, told me something I have never been able to forget. "I didn't tell Daddy," she said, eyes down on her paper. "When we went to the beach. Mommy said not to tell him, so I didn't, even when he called that time." She pressed the crayon harder against the page. "Was that bad? That I didn't tell?" And there it was. 2 months of my sister's instructions, living inside an 8-year-old, turned into a small, heavy thing she'd been carrying around on her own, wondering if it made her a bad person. I set my crayon down. I turned my whole chair to face her. "No," I said. "I need you to hear me, Harper. You did not do one single thing wrong. Not one. You were a kid, and a grown-up told you to keep a secret, and that was never supposed to be a weight you carried. That belonged to the grown-ups. Never to you." She nodded, slow. Her eyes had gone shiny. "Keeping secrets for grown-ups isn't your job," I told her. "Cleaning up every spill isn't your job. Looking after everybody in the room isn't your job. You're 8 years old. Your only job on this earth right now is to be 8. But somebody has to help," she said. And Lord, it nearly took the wind out of me, because it was the truest thing I believed at her age, and the biggest lie I'd ever swallowed, and both of those things were sitting inside one small sentence in my grandmother's kitchen. "Helping is a good thing," I said, gentle. "Helping somebody because you want to, because you love them, that's one of the best things there is. I'm never going to tell you to stop caring about people, but helping because you're scared they'll stop loving you if you don't. That's not caring, baby. That's just being afraid. And you don't ever have to be afraid of that here. Not with me. I'm going to love you whether you clean up that water or leave it sitting there all night. It doesn't cost you anything with me. It never will. I don't know how much of it landed that day. She's 8. Some of it will just sit in her like a seed and mean something to her at 20, the way half the things Opal said to me didn't bloom until years after she was gone. But she put her crayon down. She leaned over and rested her head against my arm for a second, the whole weight of it. And then she got up and ran outside to jump off the porch step with Cooper. Just to be a kid. And I let her go. I didn't call her back to help me with a single thing. I thought about my mother then. And for the first time, it wasn't with anger. Somebody had probably done the very same thing to her once. Handed her a role before she was old enough to refuse it. Called it love, and let her carry it until carrying it was the only thing she knew how to do. Maybe that's how it always travels. Quiet, from one set of hands to the next, a job dressed up as a personality, passed down through a family like a set of dishes nobody remembers choosing. And it only stops when one person finally sets it down and refuses to put it back into a child's arms. So I sat at that table and watched Harper be 8 years old in my grandmother's yard, and I made myself a promise as plain and hard as any I've ever made. Not this one. Whatever it costs me, however long it takes. Not this one. Because that was the thing I could actually give her. The only inheritance worth passing down. Not a beach trip. Not money in an envelope. Just the sentence nobody ever thought to say to me. The one Opal had tried to hand me too late. You don't have to earn it. You were never going to have to earn it. That's what I didn't have a word for. That night on the floor. It wasn't that my family didn't love me. It's that they only ever came when they needed something. And I'd spent my whole life calling that love because it was the only version I'd been offered. For 34 years, I thought being needed was the same as being loved. It isn't. Being needed is a job. Being loved is someone asking if you're okay when there's nothing in it for them. My back is better now, mostly. I went back to work at Cedar Ridge and I still lift other people's parents, still hold a hand at 2 in the morning, because that part was never the problem. The problem was coming home to people who saw me the same way a shift sees a nursing assistant. Someone to do the lifting. I don't live there anymore, in that feeling. I set the thing down. If you've ever had to stop being your family's spare set of hands, I want you to know you're not the only one, and you're not the villain for it. Tell me in the comments about the boundary you finally set and the moment you chose yourself. I read every single one of them. These days, when I go out to see Opal, I don't rush. I sit in the grass by that gray stone with her name on it, and the evening light comes down warm through the oak trees, and for the first time in my life, I'm not waiting for anyone to ask me if I'm okay. I already know that I am.